clocking in. We've just clocked in and now we're in the offices. Oh, it's all about working in the offices. Drawing office. General stores. This is the issue desk. Weird. Orders would arrive at the general stores. Like if the station master needed a new broom, she would get him a new broom. Now we're in the foundry.
You couldn't stop it, and they couldn't put the brakes on.
Perhaps surprisingly, learning the intricacies of casting work within the foundries was also largely a matter of personal initiative.
We had to pick up what we knew from the old sweats. And provided you listened to them, you're all right. But if you didn't do as they said, they wouldn't hesitate to cut you around the ear and say, that's not the way I showed you.
Throughout the Swindon works, people were more often referred to not by name, but by nickname.
Hey, when all in the shop like that, we had another bloke and he used to wear his glasses, old folk, but he wore his glasses on the end of his nose, and he was a proper old woman, you know, and they called him Granny.
In contrast to the majority of workshops, because of the need to keep the furnaces active, the foundries usually worked in shifts, right round the clock.
It used to be, I hated it. I thought it was a cat's whiskey roll told
So they didn't have a canteen, it was limited, so you all have to go home. So this is what it would have looked like inside the foundry.
As the most prestigious jobs of all. Generally working by hand, wood and metal, the pattern maker had to translate the mechanical drawings and blueprints from the engineering draftsman into a perfect replica of the finished component. This was very often made up of several interlocking parts, building up like a jigsaw. This was the pattern defining the form that the hot metal would follow, crafted slightly larger to allow for changes in the cooling method. The Swindon works was said to have had around 75,000 casting pans, which were not only for the manufacture of locomotive and rolling stock parts, but for other everyday items on the railway. The casting of a water pipe requires a two-part pan and two-part moulding box. One half of the pattern is placed on a board at the bottom of one half of the moulding box, then filled with sand and rammed hard to eliminate air pockets. This box is then turned over, board removed, and the other half of the pattern placed on top. A runner and a riser are placed at either end to provide the channels for the hot metal to enter and escape. The top of the moulding box is attached, filled with sand and rammed hard. The runner and riser removed and the box is separated. Now is the time to wrap the pattern, easing it out of the sand, leaving the desired imprint. As this pipe will be hollowed, a core is placed with the imprint, which will allow the hot metal to flow around it and not fill the space. The molder using specially crafted tools, now shapes a basin for the metal to enter and leave. Once complete, the top is replaced and secured, and is now ready to receive the molten iron, which is heated to 1,250 degrees Celsius. 2 hours later, the top is lifted and the casting reviewed by knocking the sand away. Then shape is perfected by hammer and chisel, ready to move over to the assembly shops. But although each casting could only be used once, the pattern itself could be reused time after time. Each one
This is
perfect
the pattern
celebration
maker's
of
shop.
the pattern maker's skills.
And this tells you everything what a pattern is. And that's the tools they would have used. Some of the lettering. We're now heading into the carriage shop.
They were, more like artists than workers. And as an apprentice, if you weren't doing a good job, it wouldn't be the foreman who'd tell you, it'd be the man who was standing next to you. He said, that's not the way you do it. You wouldn't do it like that here.
Lathes, drills and milling machines were used to transform crude steel bars into fine steel components, accurate to a few thousandths of an inch. Yet, up until almost the start of the Second World War, the machines were driven not by electricity, but by a multitude of overhead belt drives driven by static steam engines. It was hardly surprising that accidents happened.
What struck me is the number of people that had fingers missing or an eye, lost an eye. There was a lot of injuries like that.
But for anyone who became seriously disabled, the GWR had the answer.
People that lost limbs and that sort of thing, instead of getting compensation, they were offered a job for life.
Inevitably, work within the machine shops was, for the more ambitious apprentices, simply a stepping stone for a brighter future.
In this day and age, if someone's got certain skills, they can do working process. The rolling works will very free on knowledge and skills.
But I think obviously God lost it in you.
Works. Noise levels in the boiler shop made it a place to be avoided by those in the know. This was where locomotive boilers were made. The workshop was filled with scores of workmen riveting and hammering steel from copper to shape.
The worst part of the boiler shop, and I think it was generally acknowledged, it was the noiseless shop in the factory. I suffered out from tinnitus and loss of hearing, as everyone that I'm sure working in that shop. It was still about it, yes.
And you'd see two chaps talking in the street, and he would have his nose in somebody's ear and say, oh yeah, he works in a boiler shop. You had to get up to their ear to speak to them because they were deaf, because they worked in it all day long. Amazing.
This noise may have seemed restrained compared to the sounds some of the Swindon workforce were to face on the battlefield as they were drafted into the services during the Second World War. Women entered the factory to take over their roles and to ensure vital production continued.
It was all men. I don't think they were very pleased to start with, but they got used to us and we got used to the men. They didn't think we'd be able to do it at all. And anyway, we showed them.
Indeed they did. Driving huge steam hammers and cranes, fending off the rats that strayed into the workshops during the night shifts, was nevertheless merely the start. For before too long into the war, the boiler shop was hard at work on other things too. The last acres of the erecting shops held a special magic. For this was where the new steam locomotives were built, erected slowly and painstakingly, piece by piece. But for most workers, at least at the outset, the bulk of their time was spent in the far less glamorous task of stripping and repairing existing GWR locomotives.
The men and the apprentices work on them. If they got extremely dirty, we'll pay dirt money, which was an additional payment to wages for working, say, in smoke factories where
Yeah, not protected
Each locomotive required literally thousands of different metal components to be carefully assembled. Once complete, they could also be tested on the works test plant, known by the men as the home trainer.
Not every steam locomotive they produced or repaired went on to the testing plant. They used to be the problem ones if one had triple vibration, this sort of thing, fault finding.
Despite all the many hardships, however, witnessing the birth of a new locomotive, watching it slowly take shape over several months, gave the erecting shop an excitement and a status all its own. For each new locomotive was different, and often in very unexpected ways.
It seems silly to say it, but you can tell a locomotive after five. Very often, by the smell of the oil and the water and the steam, they seem to be a particular to each locomotive. Probably not, but we believed it at that time. And it was fantastic to see the final locomotive built, knowing it was built with so many components arising from so many shops.
Just looking at King George V. Well, that's a classic example of you can't believe all those parts were made in Swindon.
So this is the carriage, and the man making a carriage. This is the Cheltenham Fly, which was classed one of the world's fastest trains. And it is Caerphilly Castle. We'll go under in a minute. It was built in Swindon in August 1923. And when it was built, apparently it cost £5,565, which is more than £100,000 in today's money. It's one of 7 castles that have been saved from the scrapyard. That's a lot of coal. And it was very heavy. Okay, let's go underneath. And this is what it looks like underneath. You can see all the gears. Every single little component that was put on and made and built in this very place.
With Bristol. Something of the sort had long been talked about within the business world. But I was the man who conceived it, planned and surveyed its entire route, and then followed its construction every step of the way, until my Great Western Railway was the wonder of the age, surpassing even the landmarks of my father, Mark Isambard Brunel.
Work began in 1833 on the 116-mile stretch, with the 27-year-old Brunel spending most of his days on horseback, checking on the survey and visiting landowners whose property was likely to be crossed by the new railway. Where early railway pioneers George and Robert Stephenson favoured a gauge based on the width of a horse-drawn colliery cart, Brunel had other ideas. His railway would be broad gauge, over 2 metres wide. It would be as direct and level as possible, earning it the title Brunel's Billiard Table.
8 long years it took. My railway finally opening in 1841. No wonder my wife Mary and 3 children saw little of me through these years. All along the line, there were stations, bridges, buildings to design. Every mile a challenge, it seemed. Perhaps the most difficult of my tasks was the box tunnel, cut to pass neatly through 2 miles of Cotswold limestone. Not everyone shared the same confidence in my skills, however, for when the tunnel opened, the more nervous passengers chose to leave the train and take the road across the top.
This brilliant engineer was also set to revolutionise transatlantic passenger travel with the ships SS Great Western and Great Britain. However, his final ship, SS Great Eastern, proved commercially disastrous as a passenger liner and within 6 years passed into service as a cable layer. Brunel's experiments for an atmospheric railway also proved a disastrous and costly venture. But even with these setbacks, Brunel was to create some remarkable engineering feats.
For over 30 years, I practiced as an engineer unmatched in the variety of skills which were in constant demand all over the world. The long hours, the stress and anxiety from work were all to take their toll on my health. In 1858, I visited Cairo with my family to convalesce and met up with my one-time rival, Robert Stephenson, now a trusted friend, for the last time.
Some 10 months later, both men were dead. Stephenson at 56, outliving the 53-year-old Brunel by barely 3 weeks. But some years after Brunel's death, the Great Western Railway was forced to convert its broad gauge line to Stephenson's accepted standard gauge, the final stretch from Paddington to Penzance being relayed over 1 weekend in May 1892. Brunel's grave is marked by an unassuming family stone in Kensal Green Cemetery, London. But this man needs no graveside monument to tell of his achievement. The most telling memorials are the large number of his structures which are still in use today, and of course his famous Great Western Railway.
Always preferred to recruit from within.
I first started the job partly because my father worked on the railway, and I wanted to sort of follow in his footsteps. I didn't really want to go into Swindon Valley, so I decided to go in as a signal.
Each signal box was responsible for the safe movement of traffic on its own particular stretch of line. Training was an ongoing process.
You had to gradually pick it up as you went along, but there was no actual training apart from what you learned while you were there, really.
With this experience under their belts, exams needed to be passed before signalmen could man a box on their own. Tests at regular intervals ensured that rules and standards were always maintained. The GWR was to pioneer many signalling and safety devices, such as the automatic train control system, the forerunner of safety devices found on trains today. With some lines on the network exceptionally busy, the signalman needed a high degree of concentration, especially at night and during bad weather.
You had to look on every train for a tail light. And of course, if there was fog, it was very difficult to see the tail light to see if the train was complete. So you had to try and get the next person at the next box to make sure they saw it. So we used to ring down to Rodbourne Lane, which was the next box, and say, would you please look out for this tail light because I haven't seen it.
Operating the signals and points was by means of levers, which were treated with very special care.